Thank you very much, Jay, and thanks for the invite. Balmoral is principally focused out in the provinces of Ontario and Quebec, and mainly in the province of Quebec. What is Balmoral? At this point in time, Balmoral is an aggregate of a little over 2 million ounces of gold and about 136 million pounds of nickel. You want to throw that in the gold world, that's another 750,000 ounces. So significant resources on multiple projects, mainly in that Quebec corridor across the border from our good friends, across our border from our good friends at Detour. Come back, there you go. We control an amazingly large land position. Basically, if you started driving from here and you got out to Chilliwack, everything you see between here and there would be something that we would own. So it's a very large land position. It's wholly owned. It's along the major regional structure that hosts Detour. It's about 45 kilometers, our major gold deposit, 45 kilometers from Detour, and about 45 kilometers from Hecla's Casa Berardi mine as well. Excellent infrastructure in the area, fantastic First Nations working with the Cree. Obviously in the province of Quebec, huge support from the province, and our dollars spent in the ground go about 28% further than just about anywhere else in the country, courtesy of the mineral exploration incentive program that the Quebec government provides. So it's an excellent working relationship. It's led by an experienced, gray-beard, gray-haired team of industry veterans, mainly by very successful explorers, featuring two of the most recently discovered mineralized systems in the Abitibi region. It's not easy to make new discoveries out in the Abitibi, and you basically find them these days underneath the dirt, and that's exactly what these two are. As Jay mentioned, the GRASSET nickel, copper, cobalt PGE project and the MARTINIERE gold system, both of which have now seen their initial resources, both of which are open for expansion. New is important to us. If we look at, there's 15 companies that will be presenting here today, and I just threw a chart together just out of curiosity for my own purposes. The vast majority of those discoveries kind of fall in the industry sweet spot between about 1950 and the late 1980s. Since that time, the sparsity of new discoveries, whether it's here or elsewhere. And since the end of the last cycle, there's very few, obviously, in amongst those. Most of the other projects that you're going to see, you're going to talk to, have lived through that last super cycle. A handful, like the two that we're talking about, have come since then. Start with MARTINIERE. MARTINIERE is an Abitibi gold system. It is a multi-component gold system. Initial resource was produced on MARTINIERE a couple of months ago. It is at the current time about 640,000 ounces, with about 400,000 of that in an open pit configuration at a little over 2 grams, and then a small underground component at this time down at about 4.5 grams. That system is wide open to depth. All of that resource is basically contained in the upper 350 meters of the system. Most of the mines in the Abitibi region do typically reach down into the 1,000-meter plus range, and a couple of our neighbors just put out resources that reach down to that 1,000-plus meter range. So it's open to grow. It actually is 2 primary deposits, the Bug deposit, which is the large one you see, and the smaller, higher-grade MARTINIERE West deposit. It sits underneath shallow overburden cover, and like many of the new discoveries out in this region, yeah, it's a hidden deposit. When we look at it in cross-section, you can see the high-grade core, mainly in the larger Bug South lens of it, that is wide open to depth, and we recently published some winter results that continue to expand on that high-grade core. For the moment, we've suspended drilling on Bug Lake while we're in discussions with third parties about helping us fund that deeper, nastier, more expensive drilling on the deposit, but we've been very happy with the way this has come together. It's also about 73% of that initial resource is in the indicated category, so a much higher level of confidence than what you're seeing from an awful lot of initial resources these days. We announced on Thursday that the winter geophysical program that we ran north of Bug Lake has actually outlined 3 Bug Lake parallel or Bug Gold parallel geophysical anomalies of similar size in the next structural panel to the north. And sometimes it's as easy as pulling the textbook out of your closet in terms of what the model is and how this mineralization is behaving. And very much, as you see in the lower part of that slide, mineralization is pretty much, those geophysical anomalies are almost exactly where they should be when we look at the way the structures are aligned in this part of the world underneath the dirt. Got a pleasant surprise in that geophysical program as well at the north end of the survey. In the one area of this property, there actually are a couple of outcrops. We did find a couple of ultramafic rock samples over top of a fairly extensive mag high. We did then extend our grid up and across that ultramafic, and lo and behold, we've got about a 2.5 kilometer long chargeability anomaly along the basal contact of the ultramafic, which is exactly where we would hope to see nickel mineralization. So on the nickel side of our business, that's also a pretty exciting development. These are all then immediate targets, and the guys will be out there starting in a few weeks to start setting up for drilling later this summer. Martiniere is those two little tiny little yellow stars in the middle of that massive land package. So it's just a small component of what we're doing out here. So, you know, an abundance of potential for discoveries. And speaking of discoveries, we had an accidental one about in 2014. And my corporate development professional, John Folks, who I think is hiding out in the back here, John sent me this slide the other day, and he said, "Great battery slide, like this one. What's missing?" Graphite, cobalt, lithium. What's all the gray stuff? It's nickel. And, you know, that's what we have. We have one of, if not the largest, nickel, copper, cobalt, PGE, massive sulfide deposit in the Abitibi region, in GRASSET. We found this in 2014, about the time nickel peaked. We had a great run with it in 2014. Nickel then crashed, and we did the logical thing. We put it to bed. At nickel at 350, this isn't going to work, nor did approximately 87% of the nickel deposits on the planet. Put it to bed, said nickel needs to be in the 6 to 650 range. Guess what? We're back on top of the 650 range, plus benefits from copper, cobalt, and PGs. You have all heard, all seen, all know about, or have heard some version of the EV story, so I'm not going to retell it to you. Needless to say, though, that substrate of those lithium-ion batteries is nickel dominant, and there is very little on the drawing boards of any of the nickel companies out there in terms of nickel sulfide Class 1 assets like GRASSET. It's probably the hottest metal that nobody talks about. It is a place for you to pay attention to. The problem you will have is there are very few nickel plays, and there are even fewer that are active and drilling. GRASSET is one of those. GRASSET is a large massive sulfide deposit. It's about 18 million tons in total. 10 million of that we would count sort of into the deposit itself. High-grade core, pretty much vertical, sitting in the ground there of about 3.45 million ounces. It's nickel dominant. It's about 85% of the value is in the nickel. It is payable in copper, cobalt, platinum, and palladium, however, as well. It's wholly owned, and it is open to depth. As a matter of fact, some of our deepest drilling done in 2015, as the nickel price was doing this, intersected a footwall breccia zone that returned 7.5 meters at 10.5%, which is utterly stunning in the nickel world. That has yet to be followed up because nobody cared. Nobody cares. You don't waste your money. So, as Jay was saying, if a little over 2 million ounces of gold sustains our market cap, you get the nickel deposit and its upside for free. And what is that upside? The deposit is open to depth. We have these high-grade breccias now showing up at depth, which in the Sudbury region are the richest and most economic parts of the deposits. It's super simple metallurgically. It's about the simplest thing in the nickel space I've ever worked on the met side. So we can recover it. It'll produce a con that the smelters will love. And we've already had some chatter on that end. And it's the first discovery of its type in this belt. We did turn a few more drill holes, a handful of drill holes over the next 11 kilometers of this 20-kilometer long intrusion. We made 9 other new nickel sulfide occurrences, discoveries before we shut down in 2015. And along the way, we also managed to find a few occurrences of gold mineralization with the ultramafics up to 200 grams a ton. So on the Balmoral side, obviously continued expansion at Martiniere, hopefully third-party funded on that end. New discoveries in the broader Martiniere gold system. This is a new system in the Abitibi. These are very rare and they tend to be large. Continued recovery in that nickel market, and that continues on almost daily basis right now. Obviously, expansion of discovery at GRASSET, and then more work on the GRASSET nickel ultramafic complex, and the brand new ultramafic discovered at Niquette with that big anomaly associated with it, discovery potential of that massive land package outside of that, and the first exploration programs on 2 properties just to the south of there that we didn't have time to talk about in a 10-minute talk today. So there's an awful lot going at Balmoral. You get it for a really cheap price right now, and so stay tuned and become shareholders. Thanks.